So, simple and free. There's a book. So, some of you will remember it was a year ago that I stood up here and gave an introduction to Simple and Free. That year seems to have gone really quickly. And we started the journey with an invitation. So, the invitation was to see if we could do something like Jen Hatmaker, who wrote this book, did when she did Simple and Free. So Simple and Free, she did this 10 years ago now. She spent a month on each of 7 different areas of her life and tried to do a kind of fast. So not necessarily giving things up, but trying to make big changes and cut things down more than anything. And a year ago we looked at the book and we decided how we were going to approach this. And we've all done different things. But we decided to do something similar. Jen describes it as a mutiny against excess. Living simpler, living smaller, slowing down. Gaining a space in our lives for connection with God, generosity, connection with each other, and true rest. So that's the cover of the book there as well. Some of you will have read it, I know, others may not have, that's fine. So as we've gone through 2022, there were 7 areas, so 7 months throughout the year, we looked at different areas. So the areas that we looked at, here we go, food first, then clothes, possessions, media, waste, stress and spending, we switched those 2. And each month there was an invitation to get involved to do something. Some of us will have done a big thing. Some of us will have done a small thing. Some of us just won't have been able to have engaged that month. Some of us will have done it during the month. Others will have got to it later. We'll have all done different things. And the thing that I said at the time, and I'm going to keep saying today, is that it's really important to be kind to yourself when you're doing something like this. It's not about trying to run at 100 miles an hour, because guess what? No one can run at 100 miles an hour. So it's not about trying to do everything all at once, and it's not about telling yourself off for the things that you didn't do. Some of us, I'm sure, and we'll hear a little bit more from different people, but some of us will have found this really hard. Others will have found it easier than they expected, I hope. We will have all had different experiences of it, and I just want to look at the Bible. In the New Testament, the book of Galatians, it's chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. So we split the Bible up into, it's in books anyway that have been written by different people, but then within that it's been split up into different chapters and verses because that makes it easier for us to find things and to compare things. So this is the Message, which is a paraphrase. So it's not written exactly as the original text was written, but it's written in a way that hopefully we can understand it now. And it says this: don't compare yourself with others. Each of you must take responsibility for doing the creative best you can with your own life. So as we hear stories from different people this morning about what they've done and how they've experienced this and what impact it's had, just remember not to compare yourself. If you're feeling like, oh, I never got around to doing it, or I didn't know about this and actually I'm feeling like I would have liked to have done that and I didn't. It's never too late anyway. But don't get caught up in comparison, okay? We've all come from a different place. We're all at a different place in our lives. We're all having different experiences. And actually, I think I might just say this bit before we do the talk, people's different bits. But, going back to a year ago, I said our context is really different to Jen Hatmaker's 10 years ago. Really, really different. And we talked about the sorts of things in our lives. I think, Dave, there's a slide further on if you can get to it. The slide that I put up then. All the things that were kind of salient in our context. And there we go. So obviously, a year ago, the pandemic was much more at top of our minds. We live here. We don't live where Jen lives in Texas. We have different responsibilities, jobs, relationships, all the things. And our finances and resources are definitely very different to the people that Jen lived amongst 10 years ago. But when you look at that, you think that's a year ago. Actually, our context has changed dramatically since then. I imagine every person in this room has got a lot less money that they're able to spend on the things they want to than they did. Some of us don't have any, and maybe a year ago we did. Our living costs have gone up massively in that year. That's off the back of things like a war suddenly in Europe that we hadn't had for some time. Obviously fuel costs specifically, and that's partly linked to that. Politically, I think things are increasingly unstable. That polarisation that's happening, both in government and in society, in the way that, our own politics, I think that polarisation is increasing. And I think our government is increasingly chaotic. There's lots and lots of things now that you think, gosh, that wasn't the case a year ago. So as this year's gone on, the past year, we've experienced quite a lot of extra stresses as well. And I think some of those things will have made it harder for us, and increasingly are making it harder. And others might create that opportunity or that impetus to make changes. So I hope that's clear. The emphasis of the changes that we wanted to make, as I say, are about freeing ourselves up, but it's things like looking after the environment, looking after ourselves better, being more in control of our finances, those sorts of things. And so it really, although we looked at 7 areas, it all interweaves, which I'll come back to. So if we can go back to the food slide. Rachel, have you got something to share?
So when we looked at food, we talked about, there was a lot of talk about watching what we eat, making sure that what we eat is actually good for the environment and stuff. And also other ways of, I eat a lot with friends. It's very much for me a social thing. I love having people for dinner, going around their houses and eating with them, going out for dinner, going out for meals. That's one of my favourite things. And during lockdown, that's what I really missed. It's not being able just to go out, enjoy good food and good company. For me, the company is a lot more important than the food. The food is important. And so during the last year, I was just really making a point of just eating with friends, just eating with family. And I've had some great meals. I'm not in a position where it's easy for me to invite people around to my house. So quite often I go around to other people's houses. Quite often I will go out for dinner. Can't always afford to go out for dinner quite as much now because it's so expensive and I'm trying to save money. But in those moments, it's just been so good just to reconnect with people over food. And it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be fancy. I had a friend came round, a colleague came round, and we ended up having lunch together. And I just cooked her cheesy beans on toast. I mean, that's pretty much my limit on my culinary skills. But it's still a meal, and it was still really good. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just spending time with people. To me, that's the most important thing about food. And what I learned is just to be more deliberate in spending time with people and eating food.
Brilliant, thank you. And obviously, we're seeing that play out today as we have a meal together as well. So, I haven't got anyone that's offered to talk about clothes, the month where we looked at clothes, or anything that's come out of that. Is there anyone that's got anything to share about clothes? Yeah, Mandy?
I've been doing this, not wasting, buying new things. So I managed to kind of, at the end of the last year, I realised I wasted a lot of money on unnecessary spending when it came to clothes. There's one of my things that I like doing is buying jumpers and things like that. So I went through all my cupboards and I realised how much I had. So one of my goals was to not buy any more clothes. And I've stuck to it, which is really good. So I just wanted to share that you can cut back on those little spends, those spontaneous things. And it really has helped me on spending things I don't need.
Fantastic, thank you, Mandy. Possessions. Mike? Yeah, you can say something about clothes. Yeah, brilliant.
Sorry. Where do I want to stand? Here. Yeah. Wouldn't really expect a man to be up speaking about the section on clothes, would you? Or maybe that's my prejudicial thinking reflected there. What I've found is one way that life has been simpler for me with clothes is I just found that for me, I can wear a pair of black trousers, and that's kind of a staple now in my uniform, if that's the right word. And I've got 4 pairs of black trousers, and I don't need to shop for trousers or jeans or anything anymore. And I've got about 4 jumpers, and I'll buy a very good winter coat, and it's just a very, very simple wardrobe, a bit of variety with shirts, and just I find I don't need to go shopping for clothes very often now.
Yeah, that's great. So, possessions. Anyone want to share anything possessions? Because I don't have anyone for that either. Don't have to. It's all right if there's no one. I'm trying to think if Yeah, go for it.
There's nothing like moving house to bring into focus just how many possessions you've got that you haven't seen for years, you don't need. Have I got room to take them with me? What will happen to me if I don't take them with me? Answer is nothing, usually, life will go on. So, move house if you want to have a good declutter and to actually get into your head, how much have I bought? How much do I need? I don't need even a tenth of all this. As my car outside will testify, I can't see out of the back window, you can't get in the doors or anything because it's just jammed with stuff I don't need that I'm taking elsewhere where it is needed. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, and you're downsizing, aren't you? So that's a sort of a permanent decision, not to let it build up again. Yeah. Media. Chris, you wanted to say something? And then Graham can if he wants as well, wherever he's gone.
Yeah, I think media is one that is quite interesting. I can talk about trying to cut the amount of time on Facebook and what have you. But there was something else that happened to me over this year. A South African took over Twitter, and I wasn't too impressed with the way he operated. And so I closed my Twitter account. And the thing is, it did something within me. Because I found when I was on Twitter, I was getting angry. Particularly when you read the politicians' lies. Do you know politicians lie? Have you seen that? And I would react in an ungracious manner. And I would react, and it would do something within me. There would be an anger that would rise up, and it wasn't a holy anger. I closed the account, and I actually have found that I'm a lot less angry. And for me, that's just a reminder of how we can allow other things to dictate our emotional state. And I think it was a God thing. I think it was a God moment. And yeah, I'm still in process, not there, but it was just that realization of how media can dictate to us what our emotions are, rather than living from a centered place and a place of peace. And I think that for me was a learning.
Mine's similar. I think I came to the realization that these social media companies, they just want you online as much as possible. So they just feed you what you want to see. They don't feed you necessarily what the world sees. They just feed you what you want to see to keep you on their timeline for as long as possible. And that can, I guess, give you the context that that's what everyone's doing, that's what everyone's view is, that is the world in which we live. But actually, often there's another side to a story, or there's another thing. So what I try to do is actively kind of go and find the other side of that story, actively try and go, well, actually, if this is opinion of all my friends, what is actually happening out there, or if this is what the media companies want me to read, actually, what is the real story here? And I think the thing that did to me was it probably made me more compassionate and gave me a different lens on the world. It wasn't necessarily the politician's lens or how the big media companies wanted me to portray something. So often it's easy just to kind of take something at face value and go, well, that's it then, isn't it? If the BBC are saying that's it, it's it. But actually, so often it isn't it at all. So that was where I was challenged. I'm definitely not there yet. I definitely probably spend far too much time on Facebook and websites that are easy to give me news, but actually sometimes just stopping and reflecting was the thing with the media that I think, and as an outpouring of that is actually made me think, actually, you know, we need to do more as a church for our community. We need to do more to like engage people that don't yet know God and all of those kind of things. Hence, I guess we've got a little meal today.
Thank you. Oh no, my screen's gone off. What was the next one? Waste. Genta, you wanted to say something, didn't you, about waste?
Yeah, I thought first of all about the source of where we've got all our food and the stores that supply such a fantastic variety of things. I thought the source, him first, the trees, the crops, all because of him. But then, you know, I can go into the shop with a trolley full, just pile, and at the end, do I use it all? No. There's a lot wasted, so I'm conscious of that. I have maybe a lot of chicken, cook it in different ways, try not to waste too much of things. And of course, the piling of the plates, try and give a little bit. Don't need to have a lot, but be satisfied with what I have. And of course, one thing that really shook me was the good old farmers. Because of them, we get so much in the stores this day, but they've been hit with all sorts of weather conditions, and they have to produce for us. If not there, we grumble, mourn. So, you know, got to be conscious of that. And also waste. The other thing is I'm very conscious of waste around me. If things are not nice and clean and tidy, it's not only good to me to look at, but everybody around me. So I'm conscious of what management, the councils, what systems have been put in place. So I try and make use of that, the bins and all. If not, pollution, not good for us. So try and make the best of things, try and be careful with resources we have, try not to waste that. And not only that, if we try and use the systems around us, the bins, be conscious of the people around us, it's good for them as well as good to the eyes and pleasing to each one of us.
Thank you, Janta. Graham just reminded me as well that I don't know when we started, but certainly over this year we've been shopping more and more in our local refill shop, which is called Molly's Pantry, so that we're reusing tubs and glass jars and things like that rather than throwing away plastic packets regularly. So that is something we've definitely done more of over this year, and that's worked really well for us. I'd love to know the difference in what we're spending, whether we're spending more or not, but I haven't tried to analyse that. So hopefully it's not a lot more. And it may be less with some things. I know some things are cheaper. Ruth wanted to talk about spending. That's the next one.
Actually, when Dave Cooper spoke about finances, what actually struck us was the need to save for a rainy day. And I don't have much of a pension, and God really said, start putting away for a pension. And then he gave me a job I wasn't looking for, so I can actually put away for a pension.
Amazing, isn't it? You know, a need in a sense that Ruth hadn't recognised she had until she reflected and looked to God, and then he meets the need she didn't know she had. And then the last one is stress. I haven't got any volunteers for this one yet. Anyone want to share anything? Oh, Rachel does, okay. Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know me, is that I run my own business. I also, do part of the leadership team of a church. I've also just started studying as well. So this last year has been incredibly busy. And put on top of that kind of normal life as well, and the stuff that's happening in the world, I don't have time for myself very often. In the last couple of months, I've barely had time to take a day off in a week where I have a day where I have nothing to do. And towards the end of last year, I was feeling quite stressed, and the little things were winding me up because I was tired and I wasn't giving myself time just to kind of get over it and get... Because, when I'm tired, everything just feels like 20 times worse. And so over Christmas, I just was looking forward to Christmas because it was like the first Christmas where you could properly do stuff. And I had my nephew coming over to stay with me for a few days. So I'm like, right, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do all these kinds of exciting Christmas stuff. And my nephew came over, and unfortunately, he was really ill. So all he wanted to do was just to lie on the sofa and watch just rubbish TV. And actually, that's what I needed to do, was just to sit and watch rubbish TV with my nephew. And sometimes that's okay to do that. But also just spending time more with God. And just resting in him and knowing what I need as a person, as an individual, and it's different from other people. The things that wind me up are different from the things that wind other people up. The things that I need in order to kind of thrive in life are different from what somebody else needs. Because I like being busy, I like having lots of things to do, but I also know I need time to withdraw and be away from people just to recharge and just spend time in God's presence, not doing anything. Just not preparing stuff for church, or just to be and just to sit. It's so precious. And I think so often in church there's a kind of a culture that, it's not right, it's not biblical in any way, of where we're having to prove and earn our salvation. That we're so super spiritual. That, if we're not doing X, Y, Z, then we're not good enough for church, we're not good enough for God. And actually it's the complete opposite. And the thing is the story of Mary and Martha, and Martha moaning to Jesus about Mary, who's just doing nothing. Martha's busy rushing around in the kitchen trying to get everything to look perfect for Jesus. But Mary's doing the one thing, and Jesus says, Mary's doing the one thing I ask, and that one thing is just to sit at his feet. And that's all he asks us of us, is to sit at his feet. And then we serve him, not out of earning his love, but out of love. And that's such a better place to be. We don't have to earn his love, because he's already done it for us on that cross. But we need to learn to serve him out of love. It needs to become from an overflow, which needs to come from sitting in his presence more. And there's still things that, that are coming up, like running my own business when there's an economic squeeze and inflation, and I've got big decisions to make. But I'm not worrying about that because I know God's involved. And it's just giving me that kind of deep sense of peace, that peace that goes beyond all understanding, where I should be worrying about stuff, but I know God's got it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think everything that everyone's shared have been really, really good, and I hope it's been encouraging. The other thing that I wanted to share is how I kind of alluded to it already, that I found everything as the year went on, things flowed together. So instead of thinking about one thing for 1 month and then something else, I actually, especially looking back over the year, I can see how it all flowed together. So, for example, I think we were during, I think it was during the waste month, I realised about, and I mentioned it in my talk that month, how actually our emails are not just, in the ether. They're taking up space on a real physical server in a warehouse. And when we have all these undeleted emails that have just sat there for 20 years, like I have, they're actually creating, there's electricity that's going into maintaining that data. There's all sorts of things that are, resources that are being used. And you don't even think of that, but it came to my attention. And so I have actually, during that waste month, I then did approach that. And now, it's a habit for me. I haven't gone back over all the years, but I have deleted emails as they come in, and I've even come off a number of, newsletter lists and things. And so that was a media thing, actually. Email is media, and it's got a lot to do with spending, because a lot of those newsletter lists, those mailing lists, are from retailers. And I found that also reduced my stress. That it's an ongoing process, but when I can look at my emails and see what's important rather than this sea of stuff, because I've deleted the ones I don't even need to look at or that I'm not interested in today, and when I'm not getting as many, that is just so much easier to deal with. It's so much less overwhelming. And then the other example was that I hate booking doctor's appointments. I hate making phone calls. I hate the fact that it's so hard to get through to the doctors. I hate the fact that I have to find a time for an appointment. I really hate going to the doctor because you just don't know what you're going to be faced with. So I just hate that whole thing. But I got to a point where I was like, I need to do this. I need to book a doctor's appointment. I managed to get through on the phone. And that was really emotionally exhausting. But the problem was the appointment was the same day, so that was great. I didn't have to wait long, but it wasn't till lunchtime. And then I had the whole of the morning. I had not really planned anything else because I didn't know what time the doctor's appointment was going to be. And I just felt that, that nervous energy, And it was the month where we were doing possessions, so I'd got the intention to go through some drawers. So I thought, right, I will go through the drawers. That is something that's not going to require a lot of my brain power, but it's something I can do to keep me occupied. And so I did, and I found a load of citrus fruit. So I don't know if anyone else gets this, but some citrus fruit in our house goes mouldy before we use it. Some gets used. And then some citrus fruit in our house just kind of dries out. And so when it dries out, I put it in a drawer and think, I'll do something with that later. So I had a whole drawer full of dried out citrus fruit, really random. And I was like, what can I do with these? And so I had to look and I had to think about it. And I realised they were soft enough still that I could push a skewer through them and I could string them up. And I've made a garland out of the dried out citrus fruits and a pomegranate as well. And some old beads that I'd had sitting around and some other beads that where we'd cleared out my daughter's room, she had a few bits of jewellery that she didn't want, so I cut those up and got the beads off and used those. And I made this kind of autumn/Christmas/winter garland, which is still up in the house because it still looks good. Out of what was literally just rubbish. So that was something that really dealt with my stress in the moment. I felt really good about what I'd done in that morning. It dealt with some waste, and it was in the possessions month. It was as I was going through our possessions. So there was a real sense of things flowing together. And I don't know if anyone else found that, but I found that things kind of built on one another, which I think, and as what I want to talk about next is going forward a bit. But, I think that as we go forward, I think that will be significant. So, reflecting on the bigger picture. So I think I want to be realistic. I think Simple and Free was at times hard. Some of you may have found it impossible. Some of you may have found some bits hard and more than others. Even though I think, like that example with the garland that I made, like it brought joy and freedom with it, but it was hard to do it. Because it is hard to change our lives. It's when you're looking at lifestyle change, whether it's long-term or short-term, it's hard. Even when we believe that the changes are going to be positive for us, we struggle. That is a normal thing as a human being. We struggle. So if you struggled like that, that's normal. That's completely normal. And also, in the context, like I mentioned, how things, in some respects got worse. The other thing I didn't mention when I was talking about things getting, things changing and in some cases getting worse. I think the environment, the crisis in our environment, and particularly in climate change, is becoming really, really apparent. We are literally experiencing higher temperatures than we ever have. Last year was on average, the average temperature was the highest on record for the UK, and I think it was 1844 they started records. It's a long time ago. No, 1884, not quite so long. 1884. So since 1884, that's the warmest year we've had on record, and it was the first time that the UK average temperature has got to 10 degrees, so it's gone into double figures last year. And that, scientists have looked at that, and they can see that that is due to human activity. So it's not, this isn't theory anymore. It's not projection. We think this is what's going to happen. We're seeing it happening. So in that context, a lot of what we're doing just doesn't feel like enough. It feels like so much is still heading in the wrong direction. And it is so easy to ask ourselves, what's the point? What is the point? What difference is little old me going to make, or just a few of us? In the face of global superpowers who are doing things that are like moving people in completely the opposite direction. People, when you think about Russia invading Ukraine and the impact of that is huge. And all of the other things. The way our choices are limited by the choices of our government and of corporations. And again, I haven't looked at the stats, but there are increasing inequalities and injustices that we can see. We can see that they are increasing. So it's really hard sometimes to see signs of what God is doing, signs of the kingdom in the midst of all the bad things that are happening. But I just want to encourage you that God is at work and he is doing things. John 10 verse 10 says, this is Jesus' words, "A thief comes only to steal, kill and destroy, but I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance." So Jesus was saying, bad stuff's happening, but I'm doing something different. I'm doing something new and I'm doing something good. And he's still doing that. And he is the one who is in control. So the kind of the counter to the feeling of hopelessness. Well, number one, it always matters what we do individually, even if it isn't making a difference. Worst case scenario, not making any difference in the world. But something's happening in us. God is discipling us. He's helping us to grow and to change. We aren't responsible for everyone else's behaviour. We have some influence, but we can't be held responsible for what other people are doing. But we are responsible for us. So it doesn't matter if everybody else is doing the wrong thing. If you know that God has called you to do this, or this is the thing that's going to help in this area, doing it is going to be positive for you, at the very least. Although there might be negative ramifications too. I can't promise there won't be. Secondly, actually, the reality is it always does make a difference. It's just that it can be small and it feels small. But actually, it does make a difference. And I'm sure most of you have heard the story of the person walking along the beach and they see all these starfish have got washed up. And so they start to throw a few starfish back into the sea so that they can have their lives saved, that they don't dry out and die. And someone else comes along and says, well, what are you doing? What difference are you making? There's thousands of them. Look, why are you throwing them back in? And the person throwing them back in says, well, yeah, but for those few starfish that I've thrown back in, I've made the world of difference. And that's something to hang on to, that it might feel like what we're doing is small, but where we do what we do, whatever that might be, a big difference can be made for somebody else, for us, for our environment. And it isn't all or nothing either. There's, a lie that we often have in our minds is that, I'm a hypocrite. I've made some small changes in some areas, but I haven't got to others yet. I know that I need to do this and I haven't done it. And I feel like a failure and I'm not good enough. And I can't tell other people about this because I haven't done enough yet. But that's just not true. Direction of travel is more important than getting everything right now. We're all human. We're not going to get it right now. We're not going to manage everything. So again, remember, be kind to yourself. This isn't about impressing God or telling him how great we are. We're not. We're fairly limited, but it's about being obedient and just doing what we can and moving in the right direction. If you're moving in the right direction, whether it comes to the environment or social justice or anything, then that's the most important thing. Thirdly, the reward is baked in. As I say, there can be negative consequences when we do things that we recognise are right, that God's calling us to step into. But there is also joy and freedom, especially in a simple lifestyle and in a healthy lifestyle. So making changes can actually feel, once you get over that initial difficulty and resistance, it can feel like a real breath of fresh air when you recognise, actually, this is working and it's a new habit and I feel better for it. And fourthly, whatever else happens, we're on the winning team. So, we don't know all the details, but we do know that Jesus has defeated the enemy and he's defeated evil in all its forms. And actually, we have a hopeful future because that has made an impact on the world already. It is continuing to make an impact on the world, and at some point we're going to see that come to full fruition. So when we do something that we know God is calling us to, something to make the world a better place, we are joining with him and he's doing most of it. It's just like we're like the little child that's helping. None of our efforts to build with God will be wasted. So whatever you do, however hard or easy, it's not going to get wasted. And having said all that positive stuff, I'm not talking about toxic positivity. We're not talking about, prosperity gospel stuff. There's a huge amount to grieve in this world right now, and there will continue to be for some time at least. I've recently encountered the idea of climate grief in particular, and of course there is room for grief at many, many injustices as well. Climate grief can shape us, and it can shape what we do. It can shape our advocacy. I think we can all agree that grief, along with a lot of other emotions, grief is uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable, but if we can sit with it, it's important because it fuels us, and it helps us to recognise the truth, how things really are. It helps us to come to terms with things. Acknowledging our lack of control over many things is important, but also the control we do have over certain things, and especially where we haven't utilised that. And it's important to recognise and to see where too little too late is being done by those in power. It's painful, but it's important because then we know where we're starting from. We know what we're up against. It's being realistic, it's being authentic, and it's acknowledging the massive impact that is, where we might not be suffering. For example, for climate change, we might not be suffering loads yet, but there are people around the world who are suffering massively. And actually, our privilege can make us kind of shy away from recognising that because it's not us yet. It's not our next door neighbour or people that we know. But it's a challenge because, I think we need to learn more about that. I think the church in general, we're not very good at that, at acknowledging and dealing with grief. So I think it's something we need to learn more about and explore more. And it's very hard to know how we can express and experience that grief for specific things without falling into despair. There is a difference. And also, similar to grief, there's things like guilt, anxiety, frustration, that are kind of quite toxic, like despair can be, because all of those paralyze us. Whereas if we go to grief and we go to responsibility, concern, enthusiasm, those are different kinds of emotions, aren't they, that are more positive, that we can harness, and they don't paralyze us. But it's difficult, and I don't think it's something we find natural. So in all of that, we need to be kind to ourselves. I'm going to say it again and again. And then I want to read from the book. Jen says this, "Hear this, I don't think God wants you at war with yourself. He sent the Prince of Peace to soothe those tumultuous waters already. Self-deprecation is a cruel response to Jesus, who died and made us righteous. Guilt is not Jesus' medium. He's battling for global redemption right now. His objective hardly includes huddling in the corner with us rehashing our shame again. He finished that discussion on the cross, plus there's no time for that. We're so conditioned to being a problem that we've forgotten we're actually the answer. God is not angry at you. How could he possibly be? You are his daughter, his son. You're on the team. Don't imagine he's sitting us all down for a lecture. Rather, he's staging a rally, gathering the troops. The church is rising like a phoenix right now, collecting speed and strength and power." Graham, I need you to put the code in the iPad. It's turned off and I don't know the code. But we are coming into land now. When he's done that. No. I know. Okay, so I wanted to mention that at this point that the Climate Cafe are exploring some of the ideas around grief and things like that. So they're doing on 4th of March at Great Linford Memorial Hall, Climate Anxiety, Coping and Hoping. So if you're interested in exploring that more, I think that would be a great thing to go to. And you can ask me about it, or there's probably others here who know about that. So in summary, I think this is just the beginning. I think Simple and Free has been the training ground, and now we're going to hit the road running. Jen reflected on her process of Simple and Free at the time, and then she reflected again recently, 10 years later. And her reflection was that, this is just the start. As I say, God is stirring the church. He's stirring the church to more advocacy, to more justice. He's rallying the troops, as I've read. It's the other bit that was very good that she said is, it's our responsibility to challenge structures and systems that keep people out and down, locked in suffering whilst the same few prosper. This is our work. We are able in Jesus. His kingdom will come, his will done. May it be on earth as it is in heaven. And as I say, I tend to agree. I tend to agree that God is stirring something here and globally, I'm sure. When I didn't notice this at the time, but when we looked last week at the vision for 2023, and when we did the New Year service here and the things that God spoke to us, there was actually a lot of parallels with what we've done in Simple and Free that God was then saying, that are coming up in 2023. It seems to me that God is still taking us in the same direction that he's taken us over the past year with Simple and Free. So I believe the reason for that is so that we can be present, that we can be compassionate, that we've got the energy that we need, that we're free in certain ways to be available to him, to do what he calls us to. Now, I don't think that means pushing ourselves harder, doing more. That's not what it's about. And again, I think Chris really said that. I think it is doing the next right thing. Could be a tiny baby step, individually and together as a church. And remembering to offer ourselves the same grace that Jesus has given us. Remember, we're no good to him stuck in paralysis when we're despairing or bound up with shame and grief and things like that. I want to finish talking by reading another bit of the Bible. This is from the Old Testament. And it's a blessing that God gave to Moses for the priests to speak over the people of Israel. And I'm really confident that this wasn't just for Israel, that this is for us too. God intended this for us too. So I'm going to speak it over you. It's from Numbers 6, verses 24 to 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. So I've got loads of response as well for us. How much time have we got? Okay. So I wanted to quickly look at the questions, the reflection questions that we had a year ago when we did the introduction. Because I think reflecting on those again is going to be quite interesting to see how things have changed in a year. So what is the invitation? I want us to have a chance to reflect and to pray if we want to pray. Obviously, if you don't want to pray, you just want to reflect, that's fine. What is the invitation you can feel from God right now? Or what invitation can you feel in yourself? Is Holy Spirit stirring something in you? What do you think God wants to do with your life, in this case in 2023 and beyond? Is there anything that he's calling you to give up or reduce? Is there anything he's calling you to start, continue or increase? You know, it's not too late to continue on this journey. Is he simply saying, I love you, rest in me. You know, now's not the time. Rest in me. And then also, it would be really good to have a chance to thank God for what he's done through Simple and Free and to celebrate together. To ask him for an increase and for new things in 2023. To bring our hopes and our vision for 2023 and for this church and for this community and ask God to use it. And to bring our grief as well. You know, we probably all have a bit of hope and a bit of positivity and a bit of grief and a bit of sadness. And, you know, asking God for courage to face that. And for him to use that too. You know, to recognise that our grief and all those things, you know, that God can use that too. He doesn't just want to know the positive stuff, and he doesn't want to just use the positive stuff.